Have you ever visited the Big Apple?
We have, and we're going to tell you about it. Hello friends, welcome to Around the World with Joshua and Alyssa. And we had a request that we would make our hidden object a little harder, or a lot harder. So just want to start out by saying that so you know. Now we are going to spend the next 5 weeks telling you about a place that we went recently, and that is New York City. So a week ago we went to New York City for the September 11th, 20th anniversary. And so we're going to show you some of the things that we did and experienced while we were there. First off, here's a picture of us at the LaGuardia Airport. Now, around New York City, there are 3 major airports. It is JFK International Airport, LaGuardia, and Newark, which is on the New Jersey side. But they form like a triangle around New York City. And LaGuardia is an airport that I heard was really yucky in the past. And this was my first time, and they are right now upgrading the whole thing, making it really nice. So I got to see the nice LaGuardia. I have no idea what the old one looked like. But anyway, you can fly in there now if you tried to avoid it before. It's a good one. So we flew into LaGuardia, and I have been to New York City one other time. Alyssa has been there, what, 2, 3? How many times?
4 times.
Okay. So this was my second time. I went back in 2017, and when I did, I flew into Washington, D.C., and then drove a rental car up into New York City. And that was fun because I like driving in big cities. But the part that wasn't fun was the toll bridge that costs a lot, and then you have to park downtown, and that is expensive enough that you really don't want to drive a car into New York City unless you really have to. Now, there are some people who would not like the traffic either. I'm one of those who kind of thinks it's fun because I like the challenge, but most people I would not recommend that for. So this time we decided not to get the rental car because it would be so much more expensive, and instead we took the public transportation. And we started off on a bus, and we also took the subways. So now this is a map of the subway routes for New York City. And when I first looked at this, I was so confused. I could not figure out how in the world am I supposed to get from one place to the other and know what I'm doing. And then if you take the bus routes and put that map on top of this one, it's even more confusing because you can get anywhere you want to with the buses and the subways, but figuring out how to do that is really tricky. However, like once we started and got on the first one, now actually we did kind of get lost getting to that first one, but once we got there, then we were able to figure it all out pretty easily. And so I would say if you have never been there and you go to New York City, find somebody who can help you like get started on where you need to go, and then you should be good from there. You also can go online to Google Maps and the Metro Transit Authority website for New York City, and you can type in where you are and where you want to get to, and they'll tell you exactly which stops and which buses and subways to take. And I think the subways, at least the first one we were on, was a little nicer this time.
That one was really nice. It had like a little, it had like little screens even. It had like different things on them, but it told you what the upcoming stops were and how many stops to the next thing, and it kept changing and updating as you went from one stop to the next. So you always knew what was coming up. And it was a really, really nice, clean subway. Some of the other ones were a little older, but they did all have something on them that at least let you know what the stops were ahead. You might have to keep track of them a little better, but they have big signs on the wall that let you know what the streets are as you're going by. So you can, like, as long as you pay attention, you'll be okay.
Yep. So here is a picture from when we first went down into the ground for the subway. And here is a picture of the rails that the subways run on. And I just think subways are so cool because they first built the city, and then they later came and built this network of trains underneath the city. I think that's just amazing, all the engineering and thought that went into doing that. So this is the subway that we took to go to downtown New York City. It costs $2.75 to ride the public transportation from one point to another point. So that point could be a couple miles, or it could be 10 miles. You pay when you get on, and then you can get off whenever you want to. Now they also have these new tap features, so if you have a credit card that has a tap ability, or a smartphone that has like a mobile wallet, you can tap it on here and then go through, and you don't have to buy tickets or a Metro Pass. The nice thing about that is I think it's even cheaper in the sense that sometimes you can get off a subway and then get on a bus, and if they're close enough together, they consider that like a connecting
transfer or something
like
that.
And so you don't pay any extra, which if you just use the tickets, you do have to pay every single time. In this way, you know, it'll save you some money. But we didn't know about that until we got on the subway and found out we could have done this with our credit cards, and it would have been much easier. So this is one of the subway stations. They don't all look like this. This is probably the fanciest one we saw. Actually, this is near the 9/11 memorial. And when you go inside, there's like this mall inside there. This is called the Oculus. And then at the bottom of that is a huge subway station. Most of the subway stations, they just look like
staircases
going down into the ground with a railing around them.
Yeah.
And they say subway, and so you just go down.
This is more like what you might find in another country, though.
That's true.
Like bigger Asian cities, I feel like have these like malls that are connected to their subway station.
Shanghai or some of those. Yep. And also the old Twin Towers used to have a subway station in the basement there, and that is now moved to, I think, the One World Trade Tower that we'll tell you about another time. But some of the bigger towers in New York City do have subway stations beneath them.
Just kind of crazy. The whole city is connected underground.
Yeah. So we would highly recommend the public transportation, and just ask someone who lives there. They probably know how to do it. Or if you can go with somebody.
Or like at all the metro stations where you get on the subway, there's somebody in a booth.
Oh, that's true.
That would probably be able to help you too if you don't understand how to buy a ticket or any of that stuff. There was always somebody there if you're there during like a normal time of day.
Yep. So it's a little scary at first, but after that it's fine, and
just as long as you know where you're going and you know which direction. Because once you get into every subway station, you have like the two directions depending on which way the train you want to go. So you need to make sure you get on the correct direction so you're not going the opposite way that you want to go.
Yep.
But probably the more you do it, the better you'll get at it.
And kids, your parents will figure it out for you. So.
Yep. Okay, we got a new story.
All right.
Go get a snack. So, we have a brand new story. Well, new to me story. Actually, I've read biographies about these missionaries before, and they're really great missionaries. The cool thing is this one tells us a lot about each one of their backgrounds, each of the members of this couple, and then we'll hear about their ministry. Their time in their country has a sad ending, but God is still in control of the whole ending, and he used it in a really amazing way. So we're going to talk about missionaries John and Betty Stam, and they were missionaries to a country that you're going to have to find out. So, our story does not start off with our main characters together. We're going to start with Dr. and Mrs. Scott. So this is Dr. and Mrs. Scott, and they were on a big boat, and they saw their first glimpses of the edge of China. And they thought it looked like a dark and bustling city, and there was so much going on, and all these different boats out in the harbor and everything. And Mrs. Scott said, "Wow, this just looks like such a vast country, and there are so many people here." Dr. Scott said, "Yes, and this is only the edge. This is just the very coast. Once we meet up with our people here and we learn the language, we'll probably move up coast to where there are more needs, more people that need help." They were with a Presbyterian church group, And so they were going to start out with their group and then move up the coast depending on where they needed ministry. Do you think that there'll be another Boxer Rebellion? His wife asked. Now that had been a time in China where a lot of the missionaries had been killed and the children, and it had been a really, really terrible time. And at the time that they were coming to the country, that had only been 6 years ago. But they felt like God was calling them to China. And Dr. Scott said, well, I don't think so, but who knows? I mean, that was only 6 years ago, but right now the Chinese people are very open to having missionaries back in their country. And they're wanting to send their children to missionary schools and to Christian schools and to learn more about God. And the people are very open. So this is the time for us to be here. We'll just be here for as long as we can. So Dr. and Mrs. Scott started at their time off in China. And Mrs. Scott looked at her little baby and she thought, you know what? This all seems strange to us, but it's going to seem so normal to her because she's just going to grow up here. Little Betty is just going to think this is just life and this is how it is. This is going to be really interesting for her to grow up and get used to this. Once they did get to the city, it was very busy. Lots of people everywhere and so much talking that didn't make sense to them, and people going by in little rickshaws, which were kind of like a bicycle with like a little carriage thing on the back, or sometimes people would just run and pull these little things to help people get around the city. And there were always people willing to help out and grab luggage and do things for them, and they were just a little bit overwhelmed by everything right at first. But they finally found their friends and they settled in the city of Jingzhou and began learning the language and getting to know the people. And Dr. Scott was first of all a doctor, and then he just made it his mission to go up and down the area and share the good news of the gospel of Christ with the people. So Betty was their first daughter, and next they had Helen, then Beatrice, and finally a little brother named Kenneth. And so the children got to grow up right there in China. So here's a few years later, and here's Betty and her sister Helen. And Betty and Helen loved to explore the land and the area right outside their house in China. They would go play in the woods, and when they got back, they found their father's bicycle, which he happened to not be using. And so they took turns trying to get on it. And finally, Helen said, "Oh, Betty, when are my legs finally going to get long enough they can actually ride this bike? I can't even reach the pedals." Betty said, "Well, you're just going to have to get big like me. Maybe when you're 11, then you'll be able to reach the pedals." She really liked being the biggest and oldest sister and knowing all the things just about life and everything. Helen said, "Hey, I got an idea. Let's go over to the guard's house and see if they have any Chinese food, and we can have some food with them." The girls really loved to have Chinese food, but a lot of times their mom didn't want them to spoil their dinner by having food a little too early. So Betty said, "Well, maybe we shouldn't have it because it's kind of getting close to supper. But we love Chinese food and we don't get it at home. Please, please, please." "Okay," said Betty, and the girls ran over to the guard's house to get a little Chinese snack. They really liked the food, but their mom was worried that it wouldn't be good for them, or maybe they wouldn't get all the vitamins and stuff they needed, but they really enjoyed eating that food together. Well, that night after they had their supper back at home, Betty was out on the porch with her sisters, with Beatrice and with Helen, and she said, "You know, it's such a good thing that we get to be here and that our dad has such a great job. He has an important job. His job is to tell people the way to get to heaven." And the girls kind of nodded, and her little sister said, "Heaven? Well, are you going to go there someday, Betty?" Betty said, "I am. Just like our dad's telling people, the only way you can get to heaven, though, is by Jesus, because we've all done wrong things. And people who've done wrong things can't go to heaven." So her little sister said, "Well, you must not be going to heaven then, because you've done bad things." But he said, "But I am going to go to heaven because I've trusted Jesus as my Savior. And I trusted that Jesus died on the cross in place of my sins, and he paid the penalty for my sins. So now I can go to heaven, and God sees me in a different way." So that's what our dad's job is. He gets to tell all these people in China all about the good news of Jesus. And that's really important. "Well, can we just go play with my doll now?" said Betty's little sister. All right. Sometimes she did get a little bit tired of playing with her siblings, but she knew it was the right thing to do, and she knew that's what God would want her to do. Well, Betty and Helen both went to school in the area, like a school at home. And then once they got a little bit older, they went to kind of like a boarding school. And at the boarding school, they began to study some Chinese. And since Betty's a little bit older, she was at the school first, and then Helen joined her a few years later. And they began to study some Chinese characters and how to read and write and speak Chinese. And Betty was telling her sister, it's really important. I think we really should pay attention in these classes to learn Chinese. You never know, maybe someday we'll get to come back to China, and then it will be really helpful for us to already know the language. Her sister laughed. But Betty, we're getting ready to go back to the States. We're going to have a furlough, a time off from our time here in China, and you're not going to come back. You're going to go to college in America, and it's going to be many, many years before you come back. Why are you going to learn Chinese? Betty said, well, I don't know. Maybe God will have a different plan. Maybe someday I'll get to come back. But I am really excited, she said, because we're going to have a special trip with our family. And her dad had planned a 6-month trip with their family as they went. They were going to go back to America, and they were going to stop and see lots of different sites. They were going to see the temples and the pyramids in Egypt, and they were going to see museums in Italy. And the girls were really excited about all these ventures and the times that they were going to have together with their family. But the part that was hard was that once that 6 months was over and they made it to America, then Betty was going to begin her last year of high school, and then she was going to begin her time in college, and her family was going to go back to China, and that's exactly what happened. So she started her first year of school, and she got really sick. Her body just got worn down, and she got a disease that made her heart weak, and so it made it really hard for her to do all of her studies. So she spent a lot of time in the hospital, or a lot of time just in her bed doing work, and she missed her family so much. But she learned during that time that she could write poetry, and so she started writing little poems, and especially poems about how much she missed her family and their nice little house that they had over in China by the sea and by the coast. And she missed a lot of things about China, but she learned to make the best of whatever her situation was. And she got better, and she was able to make it the rest of the year through school. And then she started her first year at Wilson College in Pennsylvania. Once again, she started off the year really strong, but she got sick and was stuck again in the infirmary, which is kind of like a hospital at her college. And she was there for a lot of days, and finally a girl came in, and she smiled really nicely and said hi, and Betty said, who are you? She said, well, my name is Marguerite, and I just heard that you were sick, and I thought maybe you'd like another friend who's a freshman the same year as you. And she stayed and just spent time talking to Betty, and they became really close friends. So once Betty was out of the hospital, she would go back and forth and study at Marguerite's house, in Marguerite's room, and Marguerite would come and study with Betty, and they would go back and forth and back and forth. Finally, the next year, they decided they'd be roommates, so they didn't have to do so much walking to get to each other's room, and they spent a lot of time studying together. So as they were going into their second year of school, they were sitting at a table and studying, and finally, Betty closed her book, and she looked at Marguerite, and she said, looks like you're studying really hard, too. Is that biology? Are you working on your nursing classes? Marguerite nodded, and she said, I think I need a break, too. Betty said, well, we haven't really got to talk about our summer yet, so I want to tell you something that was really impactful to me this summer. And so Marguerite just started listening. She said, this summer I went to these special revival meetings, and I learned all sorts of things about God, and we got to do so many cool activities. We did some canoeing on the pond, and we got to sing and hang out with friends and all these things, but we had some speakers, and one of the speakers talked about a verse from Philippians, and I think this verse is going to change all of my life. It's changed so much about me already, and I think that God has some really great plans for me. And the verse is from Philippians. It says, for me to live is Christ, but to die is gain. And I think this is how I want to live my life. Marguerite said, I could tell something was different about your life already. And Betty said, I think before I was just focused on how could I have friends and how could I have a good time with everybody, but now I want to make this my goal. I want to live to be for Christ, but to know that if I die, that's gain. I get to be in heaven with God. So that's my new goal. And so Betty threw herself into doing all kinds of things that she could that would help her live out that new goal. Like, she taught classes for girls, and she would lead Bible studies. She worked at camps in the summer, and there was one really, really rough girl at the camp, and Betty made it her goal to spend a lot of time with this girl and help this girl understand that God loved her. And by the end of the week, Betty got to help this girl trust Jesus as her Savior. That was an exciting moment for her. So when she went back to school in the fall, she joined, she went to a new school. She went to Moody Bible Institute when she finished in Pennsylvania, and she decided she was really feeling like God was calling her to go back to China. So while she was at Moody Institute, she went on Monday nights to the house of a missionary who was a director for the China missionaries, and he was kind of like the director stateside. So he led a missionary time of prayer for the different missionaries that are over in China, and he told them a lot about the things that were going on. And so she became really involved with this group that was praying for the people of China and missionaries in China. And she found that while she was there, somebody was kind of catching her attention, another guy who was also there for these meetings. And she thought it was really interesting. It reminded her of a poem that she wrote, and that someday she'd be able to meet a man like this. And this was her poem. I'll recognize my true love when first his face I see, for he will strong and healthy and broad of shoulders be. He will not be a rich man, he has no earthly hoard. His money, time, heart, mind, and soul are given to the Lord. So she wondered, is John maybe this man that God has chosen for me? Is he really going to be this person that maybe will be my helper? And you're going to have to come back next time to learn more about John.
All right. Thank you. We'll come back next time and see what happens.
Yep.
All right. Today I am going to tell you about my sister Jeanette, because she just moved to Missionary Acres and has a unique ministry there. So we're going to tell you about it. That is my sister, Jeanette. She is my second sister, so she's the third child in our family.
That's a great Bible verse. That was the Bible verse that was Betty's verse
Oh.
for her life.
Oh.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
Right there on the side.
Well, there it is. And that's Jeanette. And so she describes Missionary Acres like this. Missionary Acres is a Baptist mid-missions retirement village seated in the foothills of the Missouri Ozark Mountains. And Baptist mid-missions is a missionary sending, how would you describe it? Agency. There you go. I knew there was a word and I couldn't think of it. And they are located in the Cleveland area in Ohio, and they serve, I guess, missionaries all over the world in different capacities. Missionary Acres offers affordable living for retired missionaries, pastors, and Christian workers as they continue serving Christ during their retirement years. Missionary Acres was started by a pastor whose name was Charles Emerson. There is where he is buried now. Pastor Emerson purchased 63 acres of land, where he proceeded to build a chapel and to establish a ministry among the local residents. Brother Emerson called this place Missionary Acres, and as time went on, his health began to decline as he increased in age. So in 1962, he donated the property to Baptist Mid-Missions. BMM shared Pastor Emerson's vision and established Missionary Acres as their retirement village for independent Baptist missionaries. Since then, many missionaries, pastors, and Christian workers have made this their home as they finish their retirement years in ministry for the Lord. So these are just some pictures of the 63 acres there. Jeanette was first introduced to Missionary Acres as a result of a teens missions trip that my home church did when she was 15. She immediately fell in love with the people and the ministry there, and she says her eyes were open to the rich opportunities to reaching the lost in the surrounding communities there. In addition to that, her heart was stirred by the need to serve the missionaries who spent their life to serve others and to carry out the Great Commission to make disciples of Christ. Here, now, she had an opportunity to serve the heroes of the faith that stood before her, so she actually visited Missionary Acres 7 more times. between the age of 15 and now settling there more permanently, age 26. And so she's been there 8 times between over a course of 11 years. At Missionary Acres, she's a personal caregiver for some of the missionaries. And here's one of the ladies that she spends a lot of her time helping. This lady is 92 years old.
Wow.
And had given her life to missions and is now living here. She assists them in daily tasks that lie before them, in addition to providing transportation to doctor's appointments and local activities. She's also available to serve in the local church and alongside the Missionary Acres staff with various jobs around the property. She said we can pray for her that she would have wisdom as each day brings new surprises while working with the residents and the community. Second, that she would be a light and a godly testimony to those who God brings into her path. And third, that she would have good health right now during these crazy times and safety as she travels to and from the Missionary Acres. So there she is, Jeanette, and serving God at Missionary Acres, and many missionaries who gave their life to missions and are now living there.
It's a really cool ministry and special because those people haven't really invested in a lot of people here in the United States, but they have in a lot of other places in the world. So it's great that she gets to spend time. She'll probably get to hear a lot of stories.
Yep.
From all sorts of missionaries and things like that.
And you're going to hear some of those stories right here. So make sure you keep coming back. So that being said, thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Yep.
And until then, have a great life.
Bye.